Mental health. Autistic people are often more vulnerable to developing mental health conditions. It is important that mental health staff understand autism in order to avoid inappropriate diagnosis, treatment, or support.
I have to say, from my own perspective, autism is a factor that, because, and this is backed up by kind of recent research, that you experience things, emotional things and other things a lot more strongly. That means that you're a lot more susceptible to things like stress, to situations that would cause an adverse reaction seem to cause a lot more. So you're a lot more susceptible to things like depression, anxiety, because you're living in a world that's a lot more amplified. Anxiety is the main one for me, anxiety. I'm just constantly anxious and worrying about this, that and the other. You know, thinking the worst all the time. When there's lots of good things to think about. And you know, a mind that never switches off for a minute, a second.
I think it's when anxiety levels get very high, and then I get to a point where I feel physical panic, but I don't understand where that comes from, unless I could intellectually afterwards go through and think of what I've done, and that might have made me feel overwhelmed.
And it's like a feeling almost of things being more, of the situation feeling more aggressive and volatile than it really is. So it's like in my head I'm reacting to something which is a lot more aggressive and threatening than the actual kind of reality is. And so one of the first times I went to CBT was because I would go out in public, one person would look at me or two people, and then I'd get so much adrenaline in my system, my veins would kind of pop out on my arms and my heart would be thumping, and I'd just be, it'd be full fight or flight, and I'd be ready for the fight. And it's so, it's so exhausting, so draining. That's what people don't realise. They talk about these things, but you've got no idea how draining and exhausting they are, It's like sometimes you need a few days recovery after some of these episodes.
I can often experience something and feel angry about it, or sad or frustrated, or whatever the feeling is, but I don't get that feeling while I'm experiencing whatever it is. I might get it 3 days later and then be trying to figure out why I feel upset when nothing's happened. And then someone will point out to me and say, well, you did this and that and the other and the other and the other, and that's quite a lot in a week. And I think, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I have a lot of time where I would say I don't feel anything. Someone will say, how do you feel? What the hell does that mean? How do you feel? I don't know, hot. I don't. But then at other times I will have really intense feelings and emotions that I don't see other people expressing. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and in my notes it says with obsessive tendencies, which I think is quite amusing. They sent me on all sorts of courses, sort of understanding yourself, managing your depression, how to understand worry and anxiety, social skills courses, writing courses, all sorts of things, which for me actually was brilliant, but it was brilliant because it gave me a structure to my week, because at that point I wasn't working, so I suddenly had all these different courses to go on as if I was back at school or something, and that was really great because it gave me structure. But they still, all they did was said it was depression, and I kept saying that it's more than that, there's something else wrong. You'd had feedback forms that they'd give you, the mental health services, and it would, like, be like tick boxes, and how have we done today, and what did you get from this, and what would you like, and at the end of it I'd always scrawl all over the page, there's something else, you're missing something. And I would get quite angry about it and frustrated because I knew, and they would say things to me like, so what's it like when everything's fine? I'm like, well, there isn't, that doesn't exist, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
When I was first diagnosed with adjustment disorder and post-traumatic stress, the senior psychiatrist at the Priory, where I was diagnosed in Marchwood, completely missed my autism. So there was a big piece of the jigsaw was missing, and he was treating more the symptoms than the root cause, which was that my environment wasn't suitable to my autism.
So the diagnosis was initially schizophrenia, and very quickly, I don't remember the details, it was changed to type 1 bipolar, and I was given the appropriate medication. And that diagnosis was false, because the breakdown was caused by, obviously, autism, not bipolar or schizophrenia. So for the next 2 years or more, I think, I was under the care of the local mental health unit in actually Thanet in East Kent, until the duty psychiatrist, not the same man, said to me, we need to... tracking back a bit. I was taken off the bipolar medication about 2 years after I had this event, because my general practitioner thought it was inappropriate, and in fact he flagged a monitor saying, I don't think this diagnosis is correct. So it was revised to bipolar 2, and I came off medication altogether. And a year after that, the psychiatrist said, we need to think about putting you on medication again. And I said, why? And he said, to be blunt, I've been told by management that any person on my books who's not on medication has to be referred back to his GP. So I went back to my GP, and then about 2 years after that, I moved to this area, which is Godalming in Surrey, from East Kent, and had another breakdown where I actually ran away from the monastery back to my mother, who was, back then, she's dead now, in her 90s, because I knew that I was going to have another meltdown. And now, this time, my mother took me down to her GP, who specialised in autism, I think because he had an autistic son. And he took one look at me, and that's not an exaggeration, and said, I think you're autistic. And he started the process of diagnosis with somebody who was a guest of his GP partnership, and so referred me to my local practice, and that fixed the diagnosis.
I was told that I might have borderline personality disorder. I was never officially diagnosed with it. It wasn't written down as a diagnosis, but it was discussed by a care coordinator that I had. And people were in the mental health services are very... they would talk about things like anxiety and depression. But when I went to, say, a depression support group, it didn't feel relevant. The other people, they weren't like me. It wasn't. Whereas when I went to the autism support group, it's just something just clicks. It's right.
I used to have trouble with aggression. Also with depression, but I definitely believe now that was because of the ASD, because if you try to change who you are, whether you're autistic, gay or anything, you're going to damage yourself mentally, I think. And it's only now I'm learning to deal with everything the proper ways, rather than self-medicating with booze, drugs or whatever. I'm feeling a lot more relaxed mentally.
Psychiatric nurses who you see when you're waiting for an appointment said something to me like, if you were less self-obsessed, then you wouldn't worry so much, or if you thought about others more, then you might not have so many difficulties. Which of course, if you know someone's on the autistic spectrum, then saying that doesn't really make any sense. And it's also very disrespectful